My audio keeps going in and out, or yours?
Yours does.
Are the rest of you hearing me? Are you hearing me? That's the most important thing. So Sian Proctor, spelled S-I-A-N, she takes Afro-futurism, art, science, and a lifelong passion for exploration to space on private inspiration formation. Listen to what she said. I'm gonna sit in our cupola and write poetry as I look back at our amazing planet. She is the first female Egyptian astronaut, right? SpaceX, you know, no joke business, right? With the inspiration for mission flying on a SpaceX Crew Dragon this week, Sian Proctor will become an astronaut with her art after decades of dedication to science and space. See the possibilities for you guys? On September 15, was it last year or this year? You'll tell us. This is from 2021.
Yep.
Right, 2021. 4 civilians who less than a year ago didn't know each other at all will launch to space as part of the 3-day Inspiration 4 mission in orbit around the Earth and will benefit St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So you can ask her a lot of questions about that experience. She's here to have conversation with us, right? That's why I'm giving you this background. Flying alongside Proctor, who is a geoscientist, professor, and artist, using both hemispheres of her brain, left and right, will be 3 other crew members. Jared Isaacman, a billion commander, Haley Arsenault, cancer survivor, and they Sembrowski. Oh, here are all civilian crew that need to say you can make it too, meaning the crew members are not professional astronauts or astronauts that work for an agency like NASA. Proctor's seat in the spacecraft could certainly be described as a long time in coming. Dr. Nelson has the incredible capacity of pulling people from all over the globe. I don't know how she does it, but she's able to get all of these people to cooperate with her to speak on not just this conference, but she just completed a big SIDS conference on climate change and blue-green economy a month ago. She has this incredible capacity to pull these people together. So I'm going to ask you to pay attention to what Sian has to say, and so that it will give us inspiration and hope as we look into the future to decide what's possible for us. Let's put our hands together and welcome her, please. But on a clap from Mon, and has been very finky. Do better than that. Come on, yes. Awesome. Dr. Proctor, over to you.
Can you all see me now? Hi, it's a real pleasure to be with you by video. I wish I could be there in person. I tried, but I had a trip already planned. I'm in Kenya, in Nairobi at the moment. Got in at 1 a.m. Little jet lagged, definitely. But I would love to share my space story with you. I had been chasing space my entire life. I was born on the island of Guam. We just celebrated International Moon Day on July 20th. And what's really cool is that I'm a moon celebration baby. My dad was working at the NASA tracking station during the Apollo missions. And so for the Apollo 11 landing, my dad was there. And I was born 8.5 months later. So I like to consider myself to be a moon celebration baby. And as a result, I had always wanted to chase space and become an astronaut. And it took a long time in making that dream a reality. But the key thing is I never gave up hope. And there was a lot of like zigs and zags in my journey. And that's one of the things that I definitely want to share with you, is that there is no one direct path to space or being involved in space. And that's what makes it so exciting, that you can follow your passion and um, be able to contribute to the advancement of human space flight. And so I thought as a kid that I was going to be a military aviator, and that was going to be my way into NASA and being part of the shuttle program. But back in when I was a kid in the 80s, if you didn't have 20/20 vision, I have glasses. It meant that you couldn't be a military aviator. And I just thought that if I couldn't be a military aviator, I couldn't be an astronaut, which of course is not true. But those are the things that you fill your head in, the thoughts that you have in your head when you're younger. And so I went off and I actually became a geoscience professor. This is my 25th year as a geoscience professor. I teach at a community college in Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to Arizona State University for my master's and my PhD. And in that journey, I became really a science of disasters specialist. So thinking about how and why we have volcanoes and earthquakes and deadly weather and climate change, and how to be more sustainable and those kinds of things. And so I've been doing a lot of work and research in that area in the last 25 years. But also what has happened is that in 2009, I actually applied to be a NASA astronaut. And I ended up being one of the finalists. I got down to the final 47. It was a yes/no phone call. Astronaut Sunita Williams, Sunny Williams, who is on the International Space Station right now, she called me and gave me the heartbreaking news that I was not going to be a NASA astronaut. So it was a no. But what I did was, it didn't stop me from still pursuing my dreams. And I became an analog astronaut. And I know Dr. Nelson has talked a lot about analogs and the role analogs can play when it comes to helping people get flight ready. And Dr. Nelson has attended my conference at the Biosphere 2. It's the Analog Astronaut Conference. She's been there pretty much from the beginning, and been an amazing asset to that conference. But it's all about how do we get flight ready for the moon, Mars, and beyond globally, as a humanity. And so I lived in my first habitat, was a Mars simulation. It was back in 2000 well, I should say I did two. In 2012 and 2013, I did two. I was at the Mars Desert Research Station for 2 weeks, and then I did a 4 months Mars simulation at the high seas habitat on the big island of Hawaii. I was part of the very first crew to live in the high seas habitat, and we were specifically funded by NASA to investigate food strategies for long duration space flight. But as was being talked about earlier, these analogs are really test beds for research and development. They're designed to inspire. They're designed to get you thinking in the mentality of what do we need to be able to be successful when it comes to living permanently in moon bases and Mars bases. And we want to learn as much as we can here, so we reduce the failure rate when we go there. And that's why these analogs are so important and can be set up anywhere in the world. We're getting ready for the world's biggest analog next year, where analog research sites around the world are going to join together to do a 1-month mission. And it's really exciting to, help coordinate that effort and see that come together. So I'm a big fan of analogs. So not only did I live in the in MDRS and high seas in 2012-13, but then I went on to Lunaris. Lunaris is in Pila, Poland. and I lived in that simulation for 2 weeks. And then I went back to high seas in 2020, January of 2020, right before the global pandemic. Came out of high seas, and we went into lockdown. And if you think about the pandemic and how that impacted people, it was very much like living in a simulation, a Mars simulation or a moon simulation, because we were confined and isolated to our houses, and then when we went outside, we had to wear a mask. When we went outside living in the Mars simulation, we had to wear a spacesuit, and thinking about how confined and isolated situations impact people psychologically is really important. And then how do you choose the correct crew to go to space? So coming out of that in 2020, one of the things that I learned, analogs are, I give credit to analogs for the reason why I was able to get selected to go to space in 2021. I learned so much about myself and the things that I need, how I communicate and interact with others. These are some of the things that we don't talk about. A lot of the soft skills necessary to be successful in the advancement of human spaceflight is a result of me living in these analog situations. And so not only is there a lot of hard science that happens in these places, but there's also all those soft skills that are critical for success. And so during what I learned, one of the big things is that when I'm confined and isolated, I reach into my creativity. I need to be creative to keep myself going. I'm novelty driven. So you can imagine living for 4 months and having a very strict routine of, what are you going to do every single day? If you think of the life of an astronaut, it's very scheduled and regimented. And for me, as somebody who loves creativity and novelty, I needed to bring that creativity to these situations. And so during the pandemic, a lot of people found themselves in that same situation where they needed to figure out their creativity. And so some people baked sourdough, some people picked up a musical instrument. I became a space artist and a poet during that time. And I had no idea that 9 months later, that endeavor, unleashing my creativity, would lead to me going to space and achieving that childhood dream. And so in 2021, of February of 2021, they announced Inspiration 4, the first all-civilian mission to orbit. And that was one of the opportunities, was that you could win a seat to space. And I won the prosperity seat, and I did that by writing a poem called Space to Inspire. And I would like to share that poem with you to give you an idea of, how creativity can be used to really, pursue your dreams. So this is the poem that actually won me a seat to space. I had to record this video and post it on Twitter. And then that video, along with a few other things, got judged into whether, you got selected. So this is Space to Inspire. You've got space, I've got space. We all have space to inspire. That's why we dream of going higher and higher. But what is space if you can't breathe? Let's stop sucking out the air of our humanity. We have a moment to seize the light, Earth from space, both day and night. We have J for justice, to ignite the bold. We have E for equity, to cut past the old. We have D for diversity, to end the fight. We have I for inclusion, to try to make it right. A Jedi space to rally behind, a universal force so big it binds. Inspiration to change the world, a new beginning for us to hold. It's not about you, it's not about me, it's about space to inspire for all of humanity. Science, technology, engineering, and math, sending us out on the explorer's path. But don't forget the arts, the heartbeat of time. consider sending a poet who knows how to rhyme. So let us drop the mic and close the capsule door, but please make sure Dr. Proctor is on board. My space to inspire is what we need inspiration for all of humanity. So I wrote this poem because I wanted to show people that not only am I a scientist and an analog astronaut, but I'm also creative, and that my voice, I express my voice through my poetry and my art. And I got selected for Inspiration 4, and I was very fortunate that because of that endeavor, I became the first African-American woman to pilot a spaceship. And it's changed my life as a result of that. And again, I really credit my journey to being one, open to continuing education, always learning, lifelong learning. Two, being, willing to go and participate in things like analog astronaut research, and to be able to share my experience, to be able to develop and grow as a result of that, to be vulnerable and put yourself into those types of situations, even if you feel anxious or that you don't know, or how am I going to fit in. Those are the things that you discover by going and living in these Moon and Mars simulations. And then, of course, unleashing my creativity and sharing my authentic voice in unique ways through things like art and poetry and music. Because as we go to the Moon and Mars and beyond, we've got to take the human part of us with us. That's the humanities with us. And we do that through our creative expressions. And so I trained for 6 months mainly at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California, to become the mission pilot and to go on this amazing 3-day orbit into space. So we spent 3 days up there. We did a lot of research to help advance human spaceflight and test out things. But then we also had the opportunity to be creative, and I actually painted in space. And so I want to take a few minutes to just answer any questions that you might have as you're thinking about how to get flight ready. Again, I'm a community college professor, but I've had a lot of experience just living in analogs, doing this type of research, and I'm currently a State Department science envoy for civil use of space. And that's one of the reasons why I'm in Kenya right now. And then I'm going off to South Africa after this.
Wow, what a life. Huh? Give her a round of applause, a robust round of applause, folks. I know we haven't had lunch yet, but Dr. Proctor, we are so inspired by your story. We are so uplifted. And in the room, we have some youngsters, real youngsters who are members of the engineering department here at All Nations University. We also have some, not oldsters, but more mature professionals. And then we have some oldsters like myself. I'm 72 years old, so I am in the senior bracket, who are eager to hear from you. What are some of the messages that you can give, especially the youngsters? So let's open up now to question and answer. We want pointed questions from you youngsters. What is your question for Dr. Proctor? Raise your hands. Not everybody at the same time. Where is the other microphone? Just give it to that one in the blue shirt. Same one. Yes. Please ask a question of Dr. Proctor. Yes? All three of you are going to ask questions of Dr. Proctor. You mustn't bail them out, you know.
All right. This is Ernest, All Nations University. We were hoping to have you in Ghana here at All Nations, but then I understand that your schedules couldn't meet up. And so I have a very funny question, and that has to do with your space travel. Was there anything like a life insurance for you before you took off, or the
That's a
legal processes? All right.
yes.
Because it bears some risk. All right. Maybe 50-50 risk. But then I want to know about the life insurance policy that you had before you took the flight. Thank you.
That's a really good question because we had a big discussion on life insurance and policies and things like that. It's not something that is offered. You can't just go to your local state farm and say, I would like a policy for space travel. And so this is one of the things that I think is an opening opportunity, is that how do you provide something like life insurance as more people go to space, similar to the way that we might do for car insurance. But no, there isn't any kind of like set up standard life insurance policies. Now, I was very fortunate because my commander, Jared Isaacman, he was very thoughtful in how to, for his crew specifically, provide resources for us. And so that was done privately versus commercially. And I see that there is, I don't know what Blue Origin or any of the other space providers are doing in this capacity, but it's really important area to be thought about and discussed from a legal aspect. And I think one of the things is aviation is a good precursor of looking at what happened in early aviation when it came to more and more people participating in that endeavor. And if we can look at that as a model historically to see how it went from an early kind of new technology to where it is now in those types of policy, we could use that as a potential framework for how we could set up something that would be robust, legal, and provide the necessary protection that people would want. That's a very good question. You're the first person to ever ask me that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Proctor. You have a question, Dwight? Oh, Dwight, Claire's husband, when he saw you on camera, he said, is that the lady from Arizona Space University? He is waving to you. He's saying hi.
Yes,
yes,
I've seen him multiple times. Good to see you again. And so I look forward to seeing you again next year.
Great. But the hands are coming up. But I have a question. When you were up in space and you look down on Earth, was Earth beautiful? And were you able to see Ghana and Jamaica?
Okay, first of all, there's nothing more beautiful than our planet from space. Like I have traveled all around the globe, and there are incredibly stunning places everywhere in every country, but nothing compares to seeing our planet from that orbital perspective and experiencing Earth light. And so my big thing that I got to take back from me was Earth light. Now that's a term that you probably haven't heard before. And we know about sunlight, we know about moonlight, but we don't learn about Earth light. And it's the most beautiful, spectacular light there is. And the Earth, basically transforms sunlight. It's its own prism, and it takes sunlight, the electromagnetic spectrum, and it transforms it into Earth light, and exposes the beautiful rainbow of colors we see every day around us in our world. And that impacted me more than anything else about going to space. And it impacted me so much that I recently wrote a science book titled Earthlight. It's available on Amazon now. And so if you put in Earthlight, and all one word, it will come up. But I never thought that I would ever write a science book. And as a result of going to space, experiencing Earthlight, I knew that this was something that I had to share with the rest of the world. And it's truly transformed the way I think about everything around me as a result of that.
Awesome. And even though we have you for a very short time, the number of hands I see coming up, we're going to
Aw.
ask you um, just to humor us. Yes.
Right. Dr. Proctor, congratulations on your achievement. I'm Dr. Kobena Fusuamankwa from CK Tadem, University of Technology and Applied Sciences in Northern Ghana.
Mhm.
Now, Ghana, in an attempt to train people in astronomy, if per your experience, we are choosing sites for ground simulation of astronauts, what are some of the recommendations you advise? That's the first one. And the second one, okay, so finish with that one, then I'll
Okay,
proceed with
so
that.
you're asking what type of ground locations would I recommend for things like analog sites?
Sure.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because what's cool about an analog is that you can create it anywhere. You can create it in a building at a university by transforming that space into the analog. And what I mean by this is if you look at Johnson Space Center has 2 analogs on site in buildings at Johnson Space Center. So NASA does. One of them is Hera, which is basically a tin can, and you're supposed to be acting like you're living on a spaceship for 45 days at a time. And then they also have Chapaya, which is their 3D printed habitat, which the first crew just came out of, and they lived in it for a year. And so these were places where people were put into confined and isolated situations that were just in a building. But then if you go and you look at places like the high seas habitat, which is located on the big island of Hawaii, that's at 8,000 feet on the slopes of Mauna Loa. It's very isolated and volcanic. And that's one of those situations where not only do you live inside the habitat, but you get to go outside in spacesuits, and you get to move around and investigate lava tubes and do things like that. So a lot of geologic investigations. But then there are habitats that are still inside, and you're confined into a like a lunar base, but attached to them they've created like moon yards or Mars yards, where you get to go out and simulate what it would be like to go outside, but you're still within a confined space. And so there's so many different variables. And that's one of the reasons why I love analogs, because a university can set one up right on their campus and study all kinds of things, from telecommunications, telehealth, remote sensing, crew psychology, sleep deprivation, all kinds of things, systems, and never have to leave a building, versus stuff where if you want to do more technical stuff like rovers and things like that, you can build moon and Mars yards on the campus. You just have to find and dedicate that space. But then you can go even further, and you can go and find locations that are moon and Mars like geographically within your country. One of the things that I really liked was that when we lived in the Mars simulation for 4 months, we partnered with the Canadian Space Agency, and we remotely controlled the Canadian Space Agency's rovers in Canada from the high seas habitat. And so there are partnerships and interesting things that you can do with other analogs or even space agencies around the world. And then from an astronomy standpoint, MDRS has an astronomy component attached to its habitat, and being able to do astronomical research while in these
Awesome.
habitats is also
Awesome.
important. Yes, and looking at how do you do remote astronomy. And the thing is, you don't even have to have the observatory. You could do things like, and this is, you can look this up, their SLU, OOH. They allow you to control, you can sign up and get an account, and you can control different telescopes. The Canary Islands telescopes, but different telescopes are in their program that you can go in and you can program to have, you know, your 15 minutes with that telescope to look at an object in the night sky. And you could do these as an analog research. And analogs, you know, a lot of times we think that they need to be, you know, long duration, but they don't have to be. You can do 3-day simulations. You could do 1-week simulations. You could do, you know, 2 weeks. The idea is to both inspire and prepare. And so the analogs help you inspire the next generation to get flight ready and yourselves, but then also prepare them with little interesting tasks that you do while you're in these mini, you know, micro simulations. And so it's really about thinking outside the box when it comes to creating programs, curriculum, and access, but you can teach anything around the advancement of human space flight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Proctor. We have a few people online who are asking questions. So we'd like to take one of the online questions before we come back to Doc from the Cape Coast University, and then we will take your question at the back. Okay? Who is on Zoom? Please enable someone on Zoom to ask their question. Dave?
Hello, can I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, congratulations, Dr.
Yeah, we're
Proctor.
hearing you.
Yeah, so I would like to know your greatest challenge that you had in conduct in the activities that you undertake or undertook when you were in International Space Station. And then also you can maybe highlight briefly on some of the experiments or activities that you undertake at the International Space Station and then that of the Earth. What are the differences, you know? What are some major differences or sensitivities in around it? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Yep, I've got the question. First, I didn't go to the International Space Station. What we did was an Earth orbit mission. So it was very similar to the Gemini program that was for the US, where we lived, worked, and basically played for 3 days inside the Dragon capsule. So me and my other crew members, a crew of 4, lived in our capsule for 3 days. And, you know, when you talked about the challenges, my biggest challenge that I had to overcome was 2 things. One, my imposter syndrome. That voice inside my head that fuels me with doubt. I know that I have a very cool resume and I've done a lot, but that doesn't mean that I don't have those conversations inside my head that say, you know, you can imagine I was 51 years old when I went to space. And I got on that Zoom call and Jared Isaacman said, congratulations, we pick you to be the winner of the prosperity seat, and you're going to space. And the next thing he said to me was, and I want you to be my mission pilot. Now you got to think that in my head, now I had my pilot's license, but it was over a decade old. I hadn't flown in 10 years, hadn't been a pilot. And here I was on Zoom and I was like, and my voice inside my head was like, does he know that I've only flown a Cessna and it was way back and he wants me to be the mission pilot? And instead of being like, no, I can't do that, I just shook my head and said, yes, okay. And then I calmed that voice down and I said, we got time, we will figure this out. Because as a professor, I tell my students that you can learn anything at any age if you dedicate the time to do that. And I told myself this is an opportunity to prove that not only to myself, but to my students, because I'm going to take on this, you know, incredible endeavor of figuring out how to become a systems engineer in 6 months, basically. And that's what I had to do. And to build my confidence up that I was flight ready. and that I knew my stuff before that, our mission. And so that was my biggest challenge. And I think that that's for a lot of people is we talk ourselves out of opportunity because of fear of failure. And of course, in this situation, you fail, and not only is your life on the line, but other people's life is on the line. And so being able to take that really seriously and putting in the time and dedication and asking for what I needed in order to become flight ready. So I think that's really important to learn to have that conversation with yourself, and to control that voice inside your head, and to be able to successfully move forward and take on things that are outside of your comfort zone, and that you can and give yourself the confidence that you can do that, but then surround yourself with people who help you get flight ready and inspire you and bring out the best in you is also incredibly important.
Listen
I
to
can't
Richard
hear now.
Branson
Okay, there we go.
when
Yes,
he
go ahead.
said, if someone asks you to do something you feel you can't do, say yes. He did, you know, and look at her today. Doc, I'll take your second question and then I'll take yours. Is there anybody else on Zoom waiting to ask a question?
Okay, Dr. Proctor, my question is about the simulation. Like you were inspired, or
I just lost the second half of that. It cut out. I still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can now.
Okay, all right. So you have been inspired to get to that level from your dad and personal inspiration. Now, as a lecturer, I would like to inspire my student to get to this height. Somebody may have some health challenges, especially somebody who is an asthmatic patient, may have some doubt about whether I can become an astronaut. So if you are selecting a student for a simulation process, what are some of the health challenges that as a lecturer need to look at before selecting the student?
Oh, that's a great question. And when you're thinking about like analogs, what's nice about this is that we can start to test these things. And as we go into commercial space, we're definitely testing who can fly. That's one of the things, because the parameters have been so tight. In the past, you had to be the best of the best. But now we're saying, oh, wait, but you know, what about the average person who wants to go to space and has something to contribute? How can we make it so that they're accessible? And if you look now, we've flown an 18-year-old and we've flown somebody that's 91. And so that's the gambit of, you know, like we're really opening up space. And when it comes to accessibility, what does that look like? And one of the interesting things is that you don't know until you try. And so these analog situations are great ways to start testing out accessibility and thinking about health challenges, and then what do we need to provide to make those spaces accessible. And so when you're thinking about somebody who, like you said, might have asthma or other challenges, so you can run through scenarios of those in an analog, in a controlled environment. And so one of the things that can happen is you could do a scenario when they're living in that simulation where the other crew members might not know it, but the person who is asthmatic, you know, actually pretends to have an asthmatic attack. And the other crew members have to respond to that, and seeing whether or not that's something that you can successfully do ahead of time. And then coming up with the protocols of like, well, okay, if this situation, you know, happens, could we mitigate it and have a successful outcome? Why or why not? And then you can publish those types of research and start creating precedents or cases of why people can be included instead of being automatically excluded.
Brilliant, brilliant. We have another question from a member of the audience. Please introduce yourself, your name, and who you represent, which organization, and then ask your question, please.
Okay, my name is Eric Martinson, All Nations University. And I wanted to ask, was there any particular fear you had when you were in space? I mean, something that you thought could go wrong to prevent your re-entry into the Earth atmosphere. And then I also want to ask, how does it feel physically existing in zero gravity area?
Okay, so those two questions. One, a lot of times people think that they can't go to space because of space adaptation sickness. And that varies. Everyone is going to feel some type of space adaptation sickness or feelings. When I say sickness, it doesn't mean necessarily throwing up. It means that as those fluids shift, your head becomes stuffy and your nose becomes nasal and you might feel queasy. Some people will be extreme and actually throw up in space. So there's a wide range of space adaptation that you're going to experience. Now, for me, I felt queasy, not enough to throw up, but enough where I'm just kind of like, okay, how do I kind of settle in? This was the first few, I would say 2 hours on getting to orbit. And then what I did was I said, better living through chemistry. I took Finagrin, which is a lot of astronauts take. And as a result, within a half hour, I felt perfectly fine and was able to continue. And so those are some of the things that when it comes to being in that new space and learning to navigate and orientate and live and work in, that, every individual has to figure out how to do that successfully for themselves because they don't know the range that's going to happen to them. Now you can do things like a 0G gravity flight ahead of time to see whether or not you are prone to space adaptation sickness, and sometimes that can show, sometimes it doesn't. You just don't know but it doesn't stop you from being able to go to space. That's the key, because these are things we can mitigate. Now, I'm trying to remember what the second part of your question was. Oh, fear. That's right. Oh, re-entry. People always ask me, was I afraid to go up? No, I was so excited. I was so happy. And then re-entry. Re-entry is so much more fun and so much more dynamic. But I never once thought about dying in space or had a fear of something going wrong while I was up there. I was enjoying every single minute. I can tell you when I was afraid. I was afraid the 6 months leading up to going to space. I was terrified that one, I wasn't going to qualify for my seat. SpaceX made it very clear that you may have won a contest to space, but if you do not qualify as the mission pilot, you will not fly. No pressure there, right? As the first Black female to do so, that's one way in which that seat could have been taken away from me. Two, you get sick, COVID, can't fly, you get hurt, break your leg, something happens. So I was more afraid and terrified that I would lose the opportunity before getting to go than I was that I would die in space, or something would happen that we, wouldn't be able to mitigate against. That we were well trained. I felt very qualified. I felt ready to take on anything that might happen. But I'm also very, realistic that something could have gone wrong. And to me, there are so many worse ways to die than doing something I love. And so to me, that far outweighed the risk. And it never entered my mind that that was going to be something that I needed to consciously keep present, like being able to put that fear away and being able to say, you know what, this is something I want to do. I'm super happy to do it. And I'm excited. And if something goes wrong, we will mitigate it, but I'm not going to let that, dominate my thinking. And it's important, analogs and doing extreme kind of like adventures are ways that you can start to overcome those fears.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. West Embassy, who raised his hand and the last moment. So we have to give him an opportunity to ask this question.
Thank you
Sounds
for
good.
making the time to share this this question. So you've bridged the astronaut artist divide. But I have a question about faith. How does faith play a role in this? What about individuals with different backgrounds, like Muslims who may want to observe Eid, or Jews who may want to observe Rosh Hashanah, or other types of faiths?
The end of your
Have there been any
question.
accommodations for
Okay.
individuals, or do they put it on pause during these
Oh.
trainings?
No, I don't think you put that on pause. You enable people to be able to express their faith and their spirituality, you accommodate. Now, in living in the high seas habitat, there wasn't anything, there was nothing special anybody wanted to accommodate, more so, except for things like birthdays and milestones. And in space for 3 days, we weren't in a situation where that happened. But to me, you know, when I talk about creating a Jedi space, just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space for all of humanity, that means that we celebrate humanity in those ways too, and we create accessibility, and we do not limit. And so I think that that's one of the things where, again, there is so much opportunity to figure out how we do this and do this successfully now, and have these conversations around topics like this. Because you know, in an International Space Station, I'm sure it's come up, and there is examples of how they've dealt with it through NASA. But on the commercial side, I think as we start creating more access, and we start putting up more space stations, and we start thinking about going and living on the moon and Mars, that these are things that we can start, we can prepare for now, and set up a roadmap for success. And I do believe analogs are a great way to do that, because you can put people from different faiths and religious backgrounds and upbringing into these situations, and you can start to research and document success stories and pathways forward that can be a model for all of us. And that's why I'm saying that the analogs are a great way to do all of these types of research and build a baseline of understanding.
Thank you so very much. One last question, Dr. Proctor. How did you communicate with each other? Like we see them communicate on Star Trek?
So you mean between crew members, or from the crew down to
The crew? No. The crew among themselves. How did the crew
yeah, we got
among
along great.
themselves communicate?
Oh, very well, very open communication. And that's one of the reasons why crew cohesion and setting up good communication before going to space is so important. And one of the big things about that is conflict mitigation. You can't avoid conflict, but you can give crew members the tools to be able to mitigate and work through conflict. And again, analogs are a great place to do that type of research.
Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this session. You have been an amazing audience. Give yourselves a clap and show your appreciation for Dr. Proctor for taking time out in her jet-lagged state to share with us so lucidly from her experience. Dr. Proctor, we are eternally grateful to you.
Thank you again. Dr. Proctor is ambassador for the Oaseas project on the Africa Space Exploration Analog Simulation. Thank you, Dr. Proctor. I'll be in touch. I'm saying may the force be with you. I'll always be a member of the analog astronaut community. Thank you. So you heard it. I'm glad you asked that question. We're going to take a break for lunch, but in response to your question, you heard it. You know what we're trying to do. Omni Africa Space Exploration Analog Simulation. It's meant to be a network of simulation projects across Africa. We went and found a location in Kenya in the desert last year. Machakos, which is going to be the host institution, is not actually in that part of Kenya. And the idea is for them to build an outpost and actually go out to the desert. And we don't, as you heard, have to start with any fantastic building. In fact, what we want to do in Kenya is use local architecture. They use a sand-based architecture to build some facility and then use just tents for the actual analog. So the people who are monitoring this astronauts will be in the host facility and the astronaut will be out in tent. It doesn't rain there usually. So if we pick the right week or 2 weeks, we are actually one of the sites that are signed up for the world's biggest analog. And Dr. Mensah is the technical lead on that project. He has designed solar energy communication system. We are at the final stages of approval. What we have to figure out is how are we going to raise funds to make sure each of the 12 installations can get that, which means we need help. We need someone to help us build at scale an affordable climate monitoring system that can do luminance, what do you call it, a pyranometer, the dust. We need pyranometer desks and I think temperature and wind. And Richard can also tell the other, but he's also part of the team. But we need that built at an affordable scale because we don't have a lot of funding to go and buy $1,000 projects. That's $12,000, which we don't have. So we want to actually be able to do it so I can go to people and say, hey, we have a small project, can contribute $500 so we can actually send each instrument to each of the 12 analogs. In addition to that, very quickly, because I'm answering some other questions, we need to have support to build out the actual solar energy off-grid facility. So these are experiments that we need universities to partner with. And so to the young lady who was asking on call on the phone saying, well, Africa needs to learn before it actually can do anything. I kind of have to say yes or no. Yes, we've never done an analog, but it's really not brain surgery. It's about problem solving. What we need to do in the next 12 months, this program is next year. We can get certain coaching from people who have done analogs before. But we can even do a virtual analog. You can decide to say, let's do an analog where we lock up in our houses, each of us for 24 hours, and we do an online experiment together, and we document that. Because again, if we're talking about space for all, we're talking about global collaboration, and we're talking Africa participation. One of the questions somebody asked me when I reached out for funding, like, why should we care? Why should SpaceX, why should Blue Origin care enough to fund Africa to come and compete with them? It's not logical. This is a business. This is private sector. So what is your offering on the table? So it's up to us to come up with what can we do with what we have. We have access to the internet. We have, some of us have experiments in our universities we can run, and we can do things online until we get to the stage where next year, October this time, we will have astronauts coming to Kenya, hopefully signing up to be a part of the African analog. If not, we should have some of you signing up to be part of the analog in Kenya, even if it's not official in a bit, because it took a lot of effort to get them to even agree to put Africa in the first top 12. It was not initially thought of even being possible. We've had to push for that. So it's up to all of us to do your part. Nobody's going to come and save you. Freedom is not free. You have to pull up your bootstraps and you put one cocoa, as we say in Jamaica, one cocoa full basket. And each university here can give a cocoa. So thank you very much again. I think Dr. Cyan is gone, but thank her very much again for being here. Take care. And we're now going to break for lunch. get your lunch and come back so we can go straight into our next session. We want to make sure our two speakers get your lunch first, Dr. Anita. And I think that the person from Academic City, and I think somebody from CK Tenam is also speaking on this session. Please get your lunches first. So as soon as you're done, we can get started. All right, thank you very much. We now take our break.